is National Educational Television.
People sometimes ask me how important it is to understand the Italian titles in the music. Well, it's of no importance at all, so don't go and take a 3-year course of Italian just so you can understand those old-fashioned titles in classical music. The whole idea started several hundred years ago when Italian was a kind of polite social language, and the Italian words were accepted as an international way of knowing what the music was all about. But all this has become completely meaningless. Now take the word scherzo, for instance. Now scherzo literally means joke. But of course, every piece that's now designated as a scherzo isn't necessarily a joke. The idea was one of those many revolutionary ones that Beethoven introduced into classical music. And the idea came about because the composers until then, when they wrote a big work like a symphony or a sonata, wanted a moment of light relief. So they would introduce at that point a graceful old French dance known as the minuet, or minuet if you prefer, which had been very much in vogue since the days of Louis XIV of France. Now Beethoven came along, he found that this minuet was too staid and too quiet for his violent temperament. He wanted something that could convey much more his particular sense of humor and excitement. But let's start off with the minuet so you can see what Beethoven's starting point was. The minuet that you're going to hear in a moment, for instance, starts like this. Now let's call this opening section A so that I can explain the floor plan of the whole piece to you. Then comes a middle section that has no connection with what you've heard first, and this goes like this. And then a lot of black notes right through to the end. That's section B, and after that we go back to the first section you've heard, so that the real plan is very simple, A, B, A. A scherzo can be humorous in 100 different ways. Now, take Beethoven, for instance. He had a pretty practical sense of humor. And in this particular piece, he really introduces a practical joke that is expressed in musical terms. You have on one hand the piano playing the tune. Then the violin tries to catch up with the piano, but never quite succeeds, so that you get the impression of the violin always being one beat behind the piano, as if someone were walking with one foot on the sky and with the other in the gutter. In music, there's a great deal of talk about the three big B's, Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. Bach was a very humble man who played the organ in the Thomaskirche in Leipzig, and every Sunday he had to have a new cantata ready. And when I say that he had to have the cantata ready, I'm being quite literal about it, because he had 22 children, and the 22 children had to be fed. On the other hand, Beethoven and Brahms were bachelors, a considerable contrast to Bach. And it's also fascinating to see how times had changed by the time Beethoven came along. There was a tremendous growth of democracy at that time, and it was at this time that music went from the salons of the aristocracy into the big concert halls and became part of the general culture of the European peoples. This was around the time of Napoleon, and the story is, of course, well known of how Beethoven dedicated his Eroica Symphony to Napoleon, and then when he heard that Napoleon had himself crowned as emperor, tore up the title page in fury and changed the dedication. If one goes on for another generation, Brahms was even more free than Beethoven had been before him. Brahms was greatly in demand as a famous pianist, could earn big fees as a concert performer, or if he desired, he could write a symphony which was commissioned in advance, with all the big concert societies vying for the honor of performing his works. It is very interesting to compare the methods of workmanship between one great master and another. Bach did not have much time to revise his manuscripts, and as a matter of fact, he wrote in such a hurry that many of the manuscripts were copied by his wife. And if you will remember, she had to look after the 22 children, which undoubtedly accounts for the many gross mistakes and errors that you find in these manuscripts. Brahms was such a fastidious worker that when he published his first string quartet, it was actually at least his 21st quartet. He had completely written and discarded the first 20 quartets because they were not up to his own standards. Beethoven didn't throw entire works away, but he would rewrite one phrase, one theme, 10, 20, 30 times. And this completely contradicts the naive idea we have about great composers. We think that everything they wrote down was written in a moment of tremendous inspiration. Not so. Some of the early versions of a Beethoven theme are sometimes quite uninspired. Then you find that in each succeeding version, one note has been changed. And by the time he reaches the 20th version, This version has no resemblance at all anymore to the first version he had started perhaps a week before. Beethoven wrote 17 string quartets in all, and these are usually considered as the greatest monument in all music. What makes a string quartet so different from another work? Since you're only dealing with 4 instruments, 2 violins, a viola, and a cello, every single note can be heard and every single note counts. To write a string quartet, a composer must have complete mastery of the medium, and it is usually considered the last badge of greatness when a composer can write an immortal string quartet. As I have said at the beginning of this picture, the Scherzo generally follows the same floor plan as the minuet, namely A, B, A. And this B section we usually call a trio. The reason for that being that hundreds of years ago, the trio section was played by 3 players. And like so many other Italian words that we use in music, they have lost their real significance. Now, Schumann wrote a piano quintet in which he started something new. So he doesn't just use 1 trio, but he uses 2 trios, each one completely different from the other. And this creates an extremely interesting effect. The procedure then is that we get A, B, A, now another trio that we might call C, and then back to the main section. And let us explain this to you. This leads to the first trio. Now we go back to the main section. Now comes the second trio. And now we go back to the main section for the 3rd time. Of course, you only get the real feeling of the form of the piece when you hear the entire composition. But I'm hoping that when you hear it now, you will be able to recognize the A's and B's and C's as they come along. Mendelssohn had an entirely different conception of the scherzo. To him, the scherzo was not a joke, but a thing of infinite subtlety, something that had a Midsummer Night's Dream quality to it. And Mendelssohn became especially famous for the many beautiful scherzi that he wrote. He was a man of great sensitivity, and I'd like you to see his picture, which I have here. This is an etching of Mendelssohn, and here is a letter he wrote, of which I'm rather proud. By the way, he didn't write it to me. The letter is about 100 years old. Mendelssohn was a member of a remarkable family. His grandfather was the famous Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, and his father was the founder of the banking house of Mendelssohn. His name was Abraham. And Abraham, who thought much less of himself than he did of his father and of his son, used to say, first I was the son of my father, and now I'm the father of my son. And I'd very much like you to hear now the scherzo from one of Mendelssohn's string quartets. In the 19th century, a new combination of chamber music became popular, namely the piano quintet, including a string quartet plus a piano. And one of the loveliest works in that form was the piano quintet by Dvorak. In this work, Dvorak includes a Scherzo, which again is not so much a humorous piece of music as a very gay and exuberant kind, in which he utilizes the lovely Czech folk songs, and the net effect of the whole piece is as if you were assisting at some exceedingly gay and wild country dance.
This is National Educational Television.